everyone. Welcome to our most recent live session. Tonight we're going to talk about the basics of using Easel. We did this about a year or so ago as one of our very first Creators Night events, but we've picked up a lot of new customers over that time, and we've got some people that are still taking those baby steps to get their machine up and running. So we wanted to readdress this and get people familiar with how to get their machine working with Easel. We're going to focus on the Mandrill and 3018 class machines tonight. The Silverback is very similar in operation, but not as large, obviously, with these smaller machines. So this will get you the basics. We'll talk about connecting the machine. We'll talk about getting basic movement verified, confirming the switches on the Mandrill because it does have that homing capability, and go through the steps on how to start a carve. I'm not actually going to do any carving simply because the noise level would be too great for the video. So to start out, let me bring up the machines real quick so you can see which machines we've got in place. So we've got, once we get our camera set up here, I don't have my second camera yet. There we go. So we've got a 3018, just the basic 3018 model. This is the base model of the machine. I also have a 3018 with the 300 watt spindle upgrade available. We do have those on sale right now. And then we also have the Mandrill, the 3036 machine available. So I'm going to go through each of these in turn so that we can figure out the best way to get those connected for you. So I'm going to hop over to Easel real quick. And let's see, can we make that screen a little bigger there, Charles? Thank you. So when you open up Easel and you set up your account, the first thing it's going to ask you to do is set up a machine. Obviously, I've already got a machine set up, but I'm going to walk through that real quick again for you, just to go through the steps. So if we wanted to set up a new machine, you come up to your machine menu and you have the set up new machine option. And it's going to ask you to choose the machine type. Obviously, since Inventables is the creator and manager of Easel, they're going to focus on their machines first. But we are going to work with other third-party machines. Now, when you get to the next screen, you have to select the manufacturer of the machine. We have partnered with Inventables, so we now have our machines available in here. So you can simply click the YoraHome machine make, and then the model you want to work with. So I'm going to select the 3018. We'll start with that. I don't have a dust shoe installed on those right now, so I'll leave that box unchecked. If you do check the dust shoe box, what that does is it adds a couple of extra steps in the confirmation for carving to make sure it is in place. All right, so it already recognized that I had a machine ready to go. If you did not, it was going to ask you to potentially identify the COM port manually. Because I have a machine set up already, it's asking if I want to use the existing machine profile. I'm going to go ahead and tell it it's a new one. I can do that because I have an Easel Pro account that allows multiple profiles. The next step it's going to ask you is to verify the machine movement is correct. Now, it's going to move in very small steps, and it's just enough to confirm that movement is correct. So we want to make sure that the Z, when we click up, the Z axis moves up. We can see that moving up there and down. So we can click correct on the Z axis moving properly. For the X axis, we want to make sure that left and right move appropriately. So we are seeing that movement there. The one that confuses most people is the Y axis. With the 3018 and with the mandrill, because the table is what moves, we have to recognize that the up direction is moving up in reference to the material. So when we click the up button, the work table should move towards the front of the machine. When we click the down button, the work table should move towards the rear of the machine. So up is moving to the upper edge of our piece of wood. Down is moving to the bottom edge of our piece of wood. Like I said, that's probably the most confusing bit for people getting these set up properly. So now that we have confirmed all of it that is working correctly, we can tell it yes to all three and we continue. We want to check our spindle control. This has gone back and forth. Sometimes you will see automatic here, sometimes you will see manual. For our purposes, we are using automatic. Excuse me, I misspoke. Sometimes you'll see automatic, sometimes you may see hardware. The other option being manual. Hardware or automatic are both the same function where it utilizes the controller to operate the spindle. We're going to want to select either automatic or hardware, whichever view you see, and save our spindle preference. It will ask us to do a quick check to turn the spindle on. You want to make sure you don't have any tools on there. You don't have any bit contacting the material. Don't have your fingers near it, because when we hit this button, it'll turn the spindle on for a few seconds. It automatically turns it back off. We're simply verifying operation. We continue. The 3018 unfortunately does not have homing switches. That is something that can be added, but we don't offer that kit right now. If you were paying attention in some of the earlier discussions we've had in the R&D group, we are working on another machine that will be about the same class as the 3018, but we'll have a lot of these features. So stay tuned for that. But since the 3018 does not have them, we're going to go ahead and say disable homing. We do not have a Z probe for the 3018 as well, so we'll say no to that. And then we're ready to run our project. You can choose to either run the intro to Easel project, which gives you their little Easel logo and your name, whatever you logged in with, or you can just say finish and start a project of your own choice. I'm just going to click on finish real quick, which is going to take us to our main Easel grid. Well, it's going to start out showing me all my projects that I started with. I'll just click an untitled one here and let that load up. It's going to give me a totally blank piece of material because I hadn't put anything on here yet. So to get started with a project, the first thing you're going to want to do is identify what material you're using and what size it is. Now, the materials that are listed here are not going to have a major impact on the settings that are going to be automated for the 3018. The settings that we gave Easel or Inventables for use with the 3018, we set them very conservatively, and they are the same settings regardless of material selected. So this is not going to matter which material you select right now. As we get more and more experience with different materials, we may change that in the future. But for now, we'll just leave it our birch plywood. For the piece of material I have down there right now, I've measured it, and my X dimension is 235 millimeters. And my Y dimension is 160 millimeters. The thickness for that particular piece is only 3 millimeters thick. Just a note for you here. If you have a very thick piece of wood, let's say you're using something that's 1 inch thick, and you're only planning to engrave 1 or 2 millimeters deep into it, in that situation, the thickness that you enter is not critical. Where it is very critical to have the proper thickness is if you're using a piece of material that you intend to cut all the way through. So we have set our dimensions for that material. My bit selection, I know that I am using just a 1/8 inch fluted bit with an end mill, so I'm going to just leave it right at that setting. That 1/8 inch will work just fine. If you have a pro account, you get a lot more flexibility in your bit selection. You can select your V bits, you can add your own bits to the system. If you don't have a pro account, you will be a little more limited on that. On our cut settings, these are the cut settings that had previously been saved in here. I believe the defaults are a little bit higher than this at approximately 150 millimeters a minute. Let me change the material and see what we get there. I'll just tell it I've got a pine board instead. Leave all the dimensions the same. Oh, no, it gave us some very, very extreme cut settings. We would not want to use that right now, not for this machine. There we go. MDF gives us a much more realistic number. These are the numbers you should see. 150 millimeters a minute with a plunge rate of 100 millimeters a minute and a depth per pass of about 0.2 millimeters. You might be able to go a little bit faster than this or a little bit deeper depending on the material you're using. If I was using MDF, it would be very, very easy to increase those a little bit. If I was trying to carve in a piece of oak, I may need to slow that down a little bit. It'll also depend on the bit you're using. I'm using a full 1/8 inch bit, 1/8 inch shank, 1/8 inch cutting tip. If I was using one of the very fine tip engraving bits, or say the 0.8 millimeter end mill, which is a very fragile bit, I'm going to want to reduce that feed rate considerably based on that bit selection. Otherwise, I'm just going to snap the bit off in no time. Ask me how I know. If you want to change the settings, you can do so by selecting the manual button up here in the top right, and you can override those values accordingly. If you don't have Pro, most are going to just use the offset method. That's just fine. But right now, we don't have anything on the screen. We don't have anything to carve. So I'm just going to throw a simple shape on there. I'll just throw a star down. When you put that down, you'll see that it gives you your position automatically, gives you your size automatically. I can click and move this around. If I wanted it down in the corner, I could do so. If I wanted it up in the middle of my piece, I could also do so. So I can put it pretty much wherever I want. If I then click on the cut option right here, it'll ask me how deep do I want to cut. Let's say I only wanted to go about 0.5 millimeter deep. And you'll notice when you do that, that you'll see it update over here on the right-hand side in your preview. The deeper you go, the deeper the preview will look. If I try and go full depth, it will show it cutting out. Keep in mind, if you don't have a sacrificial board under it, that's going to just dig right into the aluminum bed, and that's not going to help you. So I'm just going to set it for a low depth, just as an example. Now, one caveat is because we don't have homing switches, we can truly set the home position, the starting position, wherever we want. If I wanted to put this in the middle of the board like this, when I go through the steps for carving, I could come over here and set my start point right at that bottom left corner of the piece of wood. Or if I had this clear down here in the corner, if I set my start point right here in towards the middle of the piece of wood, it's going to put it right where it's at. Another thing you can always do is click on your center option right here, and that'll allow you to center it, and it knows now where that position is. So you can use different layouts for that. So I'll just leave it right where it's at. pretty much in the center. Over here on your preview side, if you have a scroll wheel mouse, you can zoom in to get a better idea of what it's going to look like. And you may notice, let me change the depth so you can see this a little clearer. You'll notice that on our artwork side, let me zoom in a little bit for you, we see a very distinct point on the star. We don't see that same result here on the preview side. The reason for that is because we have that 1/8 inch bit. It's simply too large diameter to get into that pinpoint, so it will never reach that pinpoint. So you may have to change bits to get the idea of what you want to see. Just like if I change this to, I'm going to add a custom bit, and I'm going to say that I have a 6mm end mill because that's one of our larger bits. Now you can see that it cut those corners even a little shorter. Oh, it didn't even save that for me. $6mm bit, will it? Okay, now I changed that to a 6mm bit. Now you can see that it's rounded off all those corners much shorter because that bit's not going to come into play. I'm going to go back to my 3mm bit or my 1/8 inch bit. I don't want to have 6mm or 6-inch bit. That would be ridiculous. So, got a question that came up. How long does it take to upgrade the spindle? If we look at the change between the 3018 and the 3018 with a spindle upgrade, what you have to do is there is partial disassembly of the machine. You take this plate off. This entire assembly right here will be pulled off of the side of the machine. You'll get a new lead screw that comes with the spindle upgrade. You'll get a new Z-axis assembly. And the kits that are shipping now are going to be a little bit different. What we've done is we've taken this motor here and it gets spaced out approximately 1 inch from the side of the machine. What that does is it moves this coupler clear out to the edge so that you don't lose any travel side to side. So you'll pull the side plate off, remove the original Z-axis, slide the new Z-axis on along with the new lead screw, reinstall the side plate, and you're ready to go. As far as total time it would take to do so, I would say for the average user, you're going to be less than an hour. It's not hard to do at all. You will end up replacing the harness here because this motor is slightly different. And you will no longer run the spindle off of the control board. It now comes with this external power supply, and you will have to go to manual spindle control in Easel. But what that allows you to do now is you can run this spindle using the variable power here, and you can set this speed accordingly. So that's the advantage, is you do get more finite spindle speed control. You're also getting a spindle that's much, much more powerful. The one I have here is a 300-watt spindle. The stock spindle is a 60-watt. So even the 300-watt upgrade gets you about 5 times the power. With that, you'd be able to increase your speed rates. You might be able to increase your depth per pass a little bit. All of that's going to help speed up your process. With the larger spindle, you also have a lot better outcome trying to use the 1/4-inch shank bits. All of our spindles will accept the collet to run a 1/4-inch shank bit, but that little 60-watt spindle is really going to get a workout trying to do that. So back to our 3018 real quick. So I went back to my 1/8 inch bit. So now we have set our cut depth. We've set where we want it to be at. We have the option here to run a simulation. If we simulate that, it'll simply show us what it's going to look like while it's running. It's going to tell us that the machine will come over, start in the center, and work its way out. Now, you'll see here that using that bit that I selected and that depth per pass, I've got it at 1.7 millimeters now. But because I chose to do only 0.2 millimeters per pass right here, if we do 1.7 divided by 0.2, it's going to make 8 passes to get to the full depth we have selected. So that's going to come into account with your time calculations as well. So I'll go ahead and stop the simulation for now. So if you're happy with where it is, you're happy with how everything's set up, we can go ahead and get started to set up our carve. To do so, we click on the carve button right up here. Easel is going to make us look at some safety issues. The first thing it wants us to do is confirm the thickness of the material. Again, very critical if you're wanting to cut all the way through. We're happy with that 3 millimeters. We confirm our material thickness. We want to make sure the material is secured to the bed. We don't want that piece of wood sliding out of there. We want it to stay put. So we say the material is secure. We confirm the bit that we've selected. Now we have to find our work zero. So we have two different aspects that we're going to set here. The first is that we have to move the bit to the front left corner of our material as stated, if we want it to match what we've shown in the background. If you're wanting to position it differently, you can certainly do so. It's entirely up to you. I'm not going to get into the advanced parts of repositioning your material or you resetting your zero for right now. So first thing we've got to do, we can see on the machine that I've currently got the bit roughly in the middle of the piece of wood. So we have our XY controls here and our Z controls here. You also have your interval right here. You can set a specific interval for both the X and Y axis or for the Z axis. I have mine set to 0 or millimeters and it defaults to 1 millimeter. Well, I don't want to wait forever, so I'm going to change that to a 10 real quick. And now we can see as we move our X-axis, we see that we're going to move over towards the left edge. And I'm going to get it to where we're right about above the edge of the wood. I want to move down on my piece of wood. I may need to tweak that just a little bit. And then we move our Z-axis down. I've got to move it just a little bit here. I changed my interval to 1 millimeter movements, so I'm very close. Now, what they ask is that you get the surface of the bit right down to the surface of the material. The easiest way I've found to do that is actually with a piece of paper. Anyone that's ever used a feeler gauge or a similar piece of equipment like that, what we're going to do is place our piece of paper underneath that bit. And we're going to slowly lower our bit. I just didn't slowly lower it. I accidentally hit way too high because I still had it set to 10 millimeters. That's a mistake that I'm sure you'll make more than once, as have I, since I just did it again. So we get our piece of paper in there. I'm actually going to set my interval way down to 1/10 of a millimeter. And I'm going to move my bit down until I feel a drag on that piece of paper. When I feel it drag, that tells me that I'm right about at the surface of the material. Almost there. Sometimes this takes a little bit of patience. I'm starting to feel just a little bit of a drag there. So once I've got it to where that drag is present, I know that I'm right at the top of my piece of material. In Easel, I would then tell it to use that new position. We're now at that last step before we cut. So we click the raise the bit. What that's going to do is raise the bit to what it's known as the safe position, approximately 3 to 5 millimeters above the piece of material. It'll turn the spindle on, ask us to confirm that the spindle is on, and if we hit the carve button, it will now go and start carving. I'm going to stop that because, as I said, the noise level would be too high for this session. So if I cancel that, it does stop the carve. So that's the basics of getting your 3018 up and running. I'm going to switch over to the mandrill, but we got a couple questions here first. So what are the max RPMs on different spindles available? Most of them max out at approximately 10,000 RPM. The wattage does not have to deal with does not impact the speed. They're all 10,000 RPM motors. The 3018 does have some variability through the control board to adjust that speed. The mandrill, the 3018 with spindle upgrade, and the silverback all have manually adjustable speeds. And what you're necessarily going to be looking for with that spindle speed is how it's cutting through the material. You want to make sure you have proper chip load and that you're actually getting material pulled up out of your cut. The RPMs you use will really be dependent upon the material you're working with. Softer woods may require a little bit higher RPM to pull all the material up and out, because otherwise you'll get a lot of sawdust built up down in that kerf that it's cutting, and you will overheat the bit and overload it. With a V-groove bit, you've got a lot more material being thrown out. You can usually run a higher speed with that. If you're into acrylics, depending on the bit, you may have to slow it down a little bit, because too high a speed will just melt the acrylic and not cut it. So all of that comes into play. As I noted, with the 3018, with the upgrade kit, you do have, like I said, either a 3 or a 500 watt spindle. You've got your manual speed control. So that's the big difference there. We do have these as part of our holiday sale right now. So if you're interested in one of those, you can certainly run and grab one. I believe we've got a lot of those actually in stock right now, so they'd be shipping fairly soon. So I'm going to clear out everything in Easel that we were just working on, and we'll move over. I want to show you the mandrill, which sets up just a little bit differently. Again, I apologize for the camera I've got. We do have our control box here. We have our overall machine, 30 by 36 work area, larger spindle. The earlier machines were a 400 watt spindle. All of them will be coming with a 500 watt spindle now. Another addition was you've got manual adjustment knobs on all the stepper motors, so you can fine tune things by hand if you wanted to just move it manually. Makes life a little bit easier for you. You've got the larger aluminum bed to give you that 30 by 36 work area. Machine comes with a drag chain across the x-axis for nice cable management. The big thing, this machine includes the limit switches, and it includes a Z probe. So I'm going to go through the machine setup for that real quick, just so you can see how the difference is when you're setting that up. So if we run back over to our Easel screen, and we want to set up a new machine, I've got to unplug my 3018 real quick and make sure that my mandrill is plugged in and turned on. So I'm going to set up a new machine again. Again, I have the third-party machine. Same basic steps. I go through my YoraHome selection, but now I'm going to select my mandrill. And I confirm my settings. I'm going to lie to it now and tell it it's a new machine so we can go through the steps. Now we have the same steps here. We're going to check our Z-axis, make sure that it's moving up and down properly. That's working. My X-axis works correctly. Same thing as the 3018 with my Y-axis. Clicking up will move the table towards the front of the machine. Clicking down will move the table towards the rear of the machine. What I'm doing is up or down in reference with the material to the wood. The mandrill does still have automatic spindle control. Now, when you test this, it's only going to turn on for a few seconds. We've got a manual speed control on the top of the mandrill controller. So when we click that turn spindle on, we'll hear a slight click, which is a relay inside the controller, and I can adjust my speed, but it only runs for a few seconds. So if you miss it, turn the knob up and you can come back and turn that speed up so you know it's working. This machine does have homing switches, so I can click yes, enable homing. And what it's going to do is it's going to slowly move in the direction it needs to home the machine. If you see that it starts moving the wrong way or it doesn't stop for some reason, you may have a switch that wasn't connected properly or something, you'll want to either hit the stop button on the screen or the emergency stop button on the controller itself, which is the big red button right on top. So when I start the homing sequence, it's going to run the Z-axis to the top, and it's going to run it to the front left corner. And that's all there is to it. Homing the machine is now done. The next question it's going to ask is, do we have a Z probe? We certainly do on this machine. So the machine comes with the Z probe, which connects to the back of the machine controller. You have your puck or probe plate, and you have a alligator clip. So what it's going to ask us to do first is make sure that the leads are plugged in. It says plug the leads into the carriage. That's referring to the X-Carve machines. For our machine, you'll want to make sure that it's plugged into the back of the controller. We'll attach the clip to the collet, or in this case, it's easiest to attach it to a bit. We tell it the clip is attached, and now it wants us to touch the touch plate to the collet. So if we simply make contact with the end of the bit, you'll see that light turn green. That tells us that that circuit is working. Now, one caveat to this that we always want to check is advanced settings right here on your Z probe setup. The default for Easel is 14.99 millimeters. The default that we entered for this machine is 19.99, but there might be some differences in the puck itself. So if you don't have one of our handy dandy calipers, you can get yourself one of those, and you want to measure the thickness of our puck, which in this case, I've got 20.17 millimeters, and it's hard to see on that camera. But if I want to have an accurate reading, I'll update that so I have a 20.17 millimeter plate. Now my Z probe is complete. The setup is complete. We're happy I'm going to finish. This takes us right back to our, I think I inadvertently clicked on the wrong item. It tried to click on one of the default easel projects that we don't want to do. So we're going to click a new one because I just want to keep it basic for you. We wait for a moment while this loads. So now we have our same machine set up here. I'm waiting for it to connect. There we go. So if I do the same basic shape, I'm not going to change anything. I've got the same bit. I do have a different size piece of wood here, so I'm going to enter the correct parameters just so it looks correct here. So I've got a piece that's 230 millimeters wide and 330 millimeters long. I'm not going to worry about the thickness because we're not cutting that deep into this right now. I have the same 1/8 inch bit. Cut settings, we have a little more conservative on this machine as well, just for good measure. But even with this machine, we're at 760 millimeters a minute. That's a pretty aggressive. We can get away with that because the mandrill has an all metal frame as opposed to the 3018 that uses the Bakelite framework. So we can be a little bit more aggressive on our cut. I might still cut this down just because I know that the piece of wood I've got there is a pretty hard chunk of wood. So I'm just going to cut this down to, say, 400. A plunge rate I'm not too worried about, but I would only want to go 1 millimeter per pass. My cut, I don't want it to go 5 millimeters deep. I'll set it to just a couple. We see the same thing. We see that preview here on our right-hand side. But we have a few different steps now for our carve setup. So if I go to carve, it wants to, again, the same steps go through here. I want to confirm my material thickness. I want to make sure it's clamped down. I've got that piece of wood cinched down to the work bed. Same bit. Now here's a little bit different. We're going to use the Z probe to set our starting point. So I tell it I want to start with the probe. I have to jog the machine so that I'm over the material. So I need to use my jog controls up here and move my X and Y axis so that I am over the material. I'm going to move well over the top of it just for visibility's sake. So I confirm that I'm there. It already knows that I'm plugged in, so I need to attach the clip. So I attach my clip to my bit. You can attach it to the collet. It's easier to attach it to the bit, however. We confirm it's attached. First thing it wants to do is verify it. So we just lift that plate up to contact the bit. We see that green in place. That highlights that last option, touch plate is in place. We confirm that. Hit the start probing button. It comes down, makes contact with that touch plate, and then goes back up to a safe area. Very important. Remove the clip, remove the puck. You don't necessarily have to unplug it from the back of the machine, but it does need to be well clear of your work area. What the Z probe does for us is it now knows that it is starting 20.12 millimeters above the work surface. So it takes that into account as it calculates the tool path. We confirm that our Z probe is put away. we set our X and Y 0. We've already set our Z axis, so we don't want to touch that Z control over here at all. We would bring our X and Y axis where we want it, right above that corner of the wood. We tell it we're going to set our XY 0 if we're happy with where it's at. Looks like I could move a little bit farther over there. Now we're at that point where we'd be ready to carve. So we turn on our spindle. We can adjust the speed accordingly, confirm that the spindle is on, and initiate our carve. Again, I don't want to go through that noise while we're on the live stream because it's going to be fairly obnoxious. So my hope is that we were able to at least walk you through the basics of getting your machine connected and getting started with it. I know a lot of people have struggled. A couple of troubleshooting tips that can come in handy. When you first start Easel, it should ask you to download the machine local driver. If you go to the machine menu, if it does not prompt you automatically, you can click on this drivers and post processors, and it will take you to a download page that you can download the driver. It will automatically identify what your operating system is. You do not need the FTDI driver. That is for a totally different type of machine. The normal operating in this version is 0.3.21. That will install. You will need to restart your browser. Another connectivity issue you may run into is up here in the top right corner. You see our carve button and our jog function button are both green. If those buttons are blue, that is telling you that you do not have proper connection to your machine. In that machine setup step, it might come up and say it's unable to connect. If that happens, exit out of the machine setup and you will click the carve button and it will come up to a different screen asking you to identify where your COM port is by manual. We have the instructions for that in the manual as far as identifying where your COM port is. Let me change my screen share here so you can actually see what I'm doing. Once that clears out. So to identify what your COM port is, you want to come down here to, I'm running Windows 11 on this machine. Your search function within Windows, you want to type in Device Manager. I've gone there recently, so it's in my recent. And when Device Manager opens, what you're looking for is this entry right here that says Ports, COM and LPT. It tells me that I have my USB serial CH340 device is on COM port 3. Like I said, that's also in the instruction manual. So if you get stuck, you can reference that. But you may need that information to get connected. So that is the basics for getting started with Easel on your machine. We've got a little bit of time left, so if you have any questions, please post them in the group. I've seen some come up. We've tried to answer them as best we could. Do we have any other questions before we move on and get ready for our next live coming up, I believe, next week? Well, we don't have any more questions, so we would ask, please, if you want to be notified of upcoming events, subscribe to our newsletter on our homepage. We will announce whenever we have a new live session coming out. We also announce all new machines coming out, any changes that are coming, sales, all of that is going to be announced via our newsletter. Thank you for watching, and as always, check out all of our products at our website at YoraHome.com. And if you have any questions or technical support issues, please email us at support@YoraHome.com. Everyone have a good evening, and thanks for watching.